We've had some high-octane politics over the past few weeks, so Agenda takes a look at some of the less headline-grabbing, calmer issues going through Keys and LegCo. Bill Henderson tells us about the Public Sector Payments Bill, which tidies up some outdated legislation, particularly relating to members' expenses. But first, Alex Allinson reveals what's behind the Treasury Miscellaneous Provisions Bill. Seems like a fairly innocuous little bill.
Well, they always do. I mean, the secret's in the name. Miscellaneous provisions tend to be lots of things added in. And some are deliberate policies, some are tidying up exercises, some are afterthoughts with, we've got a bill, why don't we put something in there? I mean, this is being brought forward by Treasury, but it's got 4 components, 2 of which are from other departments and other entities.
Let's start with the most innocuous elements. So things like the allotments committees will no longer have to, submit their accounts to Tynwald or Treasury?
Yes, I mean, you're quite right. The first bit is some amendments being brought in by the Tynwald Auditor General, who has looked at how we audit various parts of government and seen some of the anomalies and idiosyncrasies of rules and regulations that have been drawn up over decades. And so some of it is getting rid of some of this bureaucracy and simplifying things. So that's the first part of the bill. And we're doing this on behalf of the Tynwald Auditor General, or TAG as he's known. And there will be other bits and pieces that will need to come through, because he did quite a large report which went to July Tynwald, which still needs to be debated, because there's lots of things there in terms of cleaning up exercises, but also some serious policy decisions in terms of the role, the scope and the powers and accountability of the Auditor General that hopefully we'll get a chance to debate in Tynwald before further, more definite legislative changes are suggested.
And how does that debate happen? Because obviously the Tynwald Auditor General doesn't sit in Tynwald, so who acts on his behalf in Tynwald?
Well, I've talked to Mr. Speaker about when that report will be brought forward for debate. In terms of there are about almost 100 recommendations in there, some of which are very technical, and some of which are dealt with by the Miscellaneous Provisions Bill that we've got going through at the moment. Others which are far more to do with policy and long-term policy of audit and how we try to make sure we've got good value for money and decent financial responsibility throughout government from an external viewpoint. So it's going to be interesting to see how that debate goes, because we do need a lot more detail in terms of the impact of some of the recommendations that are in the report.
Of course, the Tynwald Auditor General was appointed to save substantial amounts of money. Is there any sign of that happening?
You're quite right. That was the main thrust of it, as well as complying with best practice internationally in terms of having somebody outside of government who looks at how government audits and makes sure that we do it in the right way that's clear and transparent for the Manx people. In terms of saving money, as yet I haven't seen an awful lot of that, but what I have seen is the improvement in some of the quality of the audits and some of the improvement in some of the clarity of who should be audited and how. And hopefully with the report and the subsequent discussion on that, we'll get some more progress, and then we can see once the tag's been in place for another year, hopefully they'll be able to report on some of the savings that they've managed to secure for the Manx taxpayer.
There are, though, some other elements to this bill, the Treasury Miscellaneous Provisions Bill, which perhaps would interest the public to a far greater extent. Now, one of those is in relation to the fire brigade, and this is giving the fire brigade an ability to charge for things like false call-outs. Is that pretty much all it does, or is there more to it than that?
It's slightly more than that. What that part of the bill does is actually regularise what happens at the moment. The fire brigade, with their current legislation, and they're going to be going out for consultation on new legislation and updating it in terms of both how they deal with fires and rescues, but also how they deal with fire safety. But at the moment, they do charge for certain things. So if they attend an event, not to put out a fire, but because they're there to make sure a fire doesn't break out, and the classic is the TT and the Manx Grand Prix, they often charge for that. Automatic fire alarms that go off in the middle of the night, they actually have no statutory responsibility to answer them. They do, obviously, they go round there. And what they do at the moment is that if there is an area or a building which constantly the alarms are going off, they'll try to work with the owner of that building. If they still constantly go off and the owner of the building does nothing to improve the situation, sometimes they will say, look, we're not going to answer this anymore, or if we do, we're going to give you a charge for that, just to act as a deterrent and to make sure that we can get better fire safety precautions. Because every time that alarm goes off, and we're talking about over 700 false alarms each year, every time that alarm goes off, fire officers are having to get into their fire engines. They're having to race through the streets with the sirens going. That puts obviously them at risk. It takes them, particularly the retained firefighters, takes them away from their work. But also it puts the general public at risk. From emergency service vehicles having to go sometimes at breakneck speed. So it is absolutely responsible to make sure that where there are those occasions where it is a false alarm and it's a recurrent false alarm, there is some sort of ability to recover some of those costs and to educate. I mean, the charges are the last stage of a long process in terms of educating some of the business owners to improve the systems they've got.
I suppose the opposite side of that coin, though, is that people may be discouraged from calling the fire brigade if they think they're going to be charged. So presumably there are safeguards to prevent that.
There are. I mean, the Fire and Rescue Service have a very, very clear policy. They will respond to every single 999 call. What we're talking about here is some of the automatic call-outs from a building where there's nobody there, it's in the middle of the night, and the fire alarm's just gone off. They will go there, they will make sure there's no fire. But if it keeps on going off and the owners of that building do nothing to put that right, I think it's absolutely right that some of that accountability is put onto the owner to say, either take our advice, update your fire alarm, or actually we're not going to respond in future, and you can be the one who goes around there in the middle of the night and checks that there isn't a real fire. And if there is, phone 999 will come out, but we won't respond to that when it's seen to be a persistent problem with your fire alarm rather than the service we're providing.
Having spent some time as DOI Minister, I know that one of the jibes that's often poked at the Infrastructure Minister is in relation to putting up the stealth taxes. And of course, an element of this bill is to try and reduce the amount of times that people have to do that. I remember in DOI, I mean, there must have been 20, maybe 30 orders a year, each of which increased certain fees and charges, generally in line with inflation. The bill, as drafted, tries to avoid the need for quite so many of those motions.
It is. I mean, the fourth part of the bill is about a fees order, because from a Treasury perspective, we've been looking at that. And part of it is the bureaucracy of having to individual orders. And DOI, unfortunately, are one of the largest departments that have to put through the most orders. I think it's 20 or 30 each year. And each one has to be updated in terms of inflation. Some, of course, are missed. Sometimes there's a good reason not to increase them, or they're missed. And then there's a much bigger stepwise approach. From a Treasury point of view, what this fees order allows is for us to go to the department. It's not Treasury micromanaging. Us to go to the department saying, would you like a better way of doing it? Would you like to put all your fees up at the same time by inflation, or not? Would you like, sometimes the part of the primary legislation means that they have to do a consultation just on an increase, not on a policy change. Would you like to remove that for this year and just bring the increase through instead? And so what we're hoping is this will be fairer for the general public, in that they'll know at a much earlier stage what the fees are going to be, but also easy for the department as well, not having to spend a lot of time doing orders that have to come through Tynwald one by one and just doing it more in a systematic way.
And of course, the argument that many people will say is that these are stealth taxes. This is just another way in which government can line its pockets with hard-earned people's money. Effectively, this makes it easier for you to do that.
Well, you may say stealth taxes. I'd say it's a fee for a service, and often these are services. And again, classic one with Department for Infrastructure is about maintenance of the roads, with vehicle license duty. DEFRA have fishing licenses, but they also stock all the lakes with fish. All of these services come at a cost, and one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that the fees we charge are cost reflective, and sometimes as those costs go up, the fees need to go up as well, but again, proportionate and absolutely transparently so that people can see the fees orders coming through, they're all published, and they know in advance what they may be charged for the various services that they may request from government.
So the kinds of things that I'm guessing that you mentioned there, things like, I don't know, fishing licenses and licenses to keep boats in marinas and those kinds of things. I think people would probably accept that it's probably simpler just to say these have all, they're all going up by an inflationary amount or whatever the figure might be. Things like vehicle duty, prescription charges, perhaps, would they be covered by this, first of all? And if they are, could you see that maybe people might think, hang on, these should be properly debated in Tynwald and not just automatically have this inflationary increase applied?
Well, again, it's up to the departments themselves to say which particular charges they'd like to be included in a fees order. So it's not for me to say, for instance, prescription charges should go up every year. However, we know that politically it's sometimes felt a little bit difficult to increase prescription charges, so ours haven't gone up for I think over a decade now. Now that's fine, but we know that over that period of time the cost of those drugs has gone up exponentially, and we also know that over 80% of people don't pay prescription charge anyway because they're exempt for various reasons. So one of the plans from the Department of Health and Social Care is to look at those exemptions, look at the fees, and it's really up to them to decide the policy. But in terms of vehicle duties, if the policy, we've had changes in policies in terms of the size of the engine and then emissions and what it should be charged on. Once you've set that policy, is it not better to have an annual increase according to inflation rather than what's sometimes been seen as nothing for a couple of years due to perhaps lack of political appetite to increase charges, and then a sudden stepwise increase that a lot of people find is unfair? And I think, again, it's giving those individual departments the ability to bring forward fees orders in a slightly better way, still with that transparency, and it's still going through Tynwald, but in a better way that doesn't lead to lots and lots of bureaucracy. And
finally, Dr. Allinson, the penny pincher.
Yes, we went through a consultation about small change. And lots of people replied to it. It was really interesting because from a business point of view, small change is seen as a bit of a burden. From a personal point of view, there were some concerns about charities that they wouldn't get more collections, although a lot of people don't carry cash nowadays, but also an overwhelming fear that, as we've seen with things like decimalisation in the past, for those of us who were old enough to remember that by getting rid of small change and rounding up or rounding down, you might affect inflation. Now, we've made the policy decision not to get rid of small change, but what we have said is that if the UK were to do so, we'd follow suit. But then we looked at the legislation that we have, and we don't have very much. And actually, to take money out of circulation at the moment, it's putting 2 adverts in the paper. That's about it. So we want to strengthen the communication we'd have to do if we use this ability in the future, but also looked at the rounding. That if either small change became short in supply or small coins were removed from circulation, that we would bring forward regulations to allow for rounding. Because one of the reflections on the consultation was from small businesses saying, we don't want to get in big conflict and arguments with our customers. We'd like something from government to say how we do this. And again, looking at the Republic of Ireland, when they got rid of very small coins there, they produced guidance and regulations for small businesses that helped that an awful lot. So there is no intention to get rid of small coins. We've actually said that with the consultation. But what we will do is try to bring forward some legislation so that in the future, if we need to, we've got the vires to do it.
That was Treasury Minister Alex Allinson. Next, Bill Henderson is taking the public sector payments bill through LegCo. Some of the the various roles that individuals take public sector in public sector bodies, they're not covered by the normal sort of employment legislation because they're not employed, they're directors, things like this, and effectively the legislation which you have been working under is getting a little bit archaic. So it's really a case of bringing that up to speed.
That's absolutely correct, Phil. The legislation we're currently dealing with has unfortunately lost its scope, where by now government has many bodies working for it or at arm's length, which really do not fit the descriptors from the original Act, and it's causing legislative headaches, least of all within Treasury as well, payment issues as to which part of an Act they fall under. Are they part of a department system? Are they out with a department? How are we going to describe the situation? So what this bill does is modernise the whole setup, and it uses flexible language to try and encompass everything that we've encountered so far, and then put legislation in place which is as future-proofed as far as we can to ensure the smooth administration and in particular payments to the various public bodies that operate either within departments or out with departments, but which are connected for payment purposes only to that department. And that's where some of the issues arise. It's that connectivity and to make sure the impartiality is kept. So we're progressing this to try and address these issues, which will make administration far easier for everyone and an easier understanding of where a board or body that sits outside of government sits with regards to its payments, its expenses and so on.
So the sorts of boards we're talking about, I'm guessing it'll be things like Office of Fair Trade and Manx National Heritage, things like this?
There's a whole range, plethora of government boards, even the board that sits to look at human rights for prisoners, for instance, and equality issues, and, as I say, a whole range of other points that government is advised upon. And most of them are named in the Act, but the Act is wide enough and written in such a way that any other boards or consultative bodies are encompassed by it, or indeed the formulation of a future board, a consultative body, will also be encompassed within the Act.
Of course, the other important bit that's covered by this is Tynwald members. How does the bill as currently drafted impact on that?
Well, it will sweep up the payment of members' expenses with regards to Tynwald into this legislation. However, the policy and legislation officers who've been working on this have been in close liaison with the Tynwald Management Committee and indeed the Tynwald Emoluments Committee, and as part of the whole exercise there will be extensive consultation going forward in any place. There'll be further consultation with the Tynwald Management Committee / Emoluments Committee and also the departments, because regulations and secondary legislation has to come forward as a result of the bill becoming an Act, so that these are the actual instructions and detail of what is and what is not to happen. So the Act specifically mentions that Tynwald members' remuneration will be as is at the minute and will be respected until the full changes that the Tynwald Emoluments Committee recommended a couple of years ago are implemented. So it allows for those changes and recognises that the Tynwald Emoluments Committee has made those recommendations and indeed supports or provides a structure for those changes to carry on.
And again, for those who are perhaps not experts on how law works, effectively the bill and the Act, as it will hopefully become, they give the powers for departments, in this case Treasury, to then go on and do the various functions. So in this case, it would be producing the regulations. The power to produce regulation is within the bill, and the bill limits what can and can't be introduced via regulation and secondary legislation.
That's right. As they say, the devil's always in the detail, and that's why we've made a special point here of probably very extensive consultation to unfold as the bill progresses, and hopefully, as you say, Phil, is passed, gets royal assent, and that's the point then when officers will start working or finishing regulations and secondary legislation that actually provide the very detailed instructions, if I can put it like that, as to how things are going to work, how payments should be made in the future, how boards are defined, the lines of payment, the structure of payment routes from departments to the boards, and so on.
So in relation then to members, does this bill basically make it possible for the whole issue about members' pay to not have to come up every 2 or 3 years and have a big, wide-ranging debate in Tynwald? In essence, it will link Tynwald members' pay to a particular element of the civil service pay scales, or how does it work?
Well, I think we need to knock some urban legends on the head straight away there, Phil. The debates we've witnessed and heard over the years on Tynwald members' pay isn't actually to do with Tynwald awarding pay awards to itself. Tynwald does not do that, and it has not the viaries to do it. Tynwald members' pay is linked to the civil service pay spine. So if there's an award in a year to the civil service, members are linked to that and will receive that automatically no matter what. So it's out with Tynwald, and rightly so that politicians can't interfere with their own wages and remuneration. That being said, this bill recognises that the Tynwald Emoluments Committee has examined the situation of Tynwald members' pay as a result of a debate with regards to reforming the pay, not as to the yearly amount and so on, which I must stress is not a Tynwald decision. Tynwald pay is linked to the civil service, so what this bill does is recognise the Emoluments Committee's work and allows for that to continue, and any protections that are already in place for existing members who are affected from that, and allows that to move forward without interfering, but running parallel and working in conjunction with those recommendations. And
one of the ambitions of this bill, I noted in your sort of final remarks in first reading, that one of the motivations for the bill had come out of a report looking at the vast array of boards and committees that exist around government, and the hope was that some of these boards could be done away with, that they would no longer be necessary, and that by giving a year after this bill comes into, well, assuming it, of course, it receives royal assent after it comes into effect, that year, hopefully, in your words, some of these boards and committees can be looked at again, and maybe departments can take action about limiting some of them.
Well, I'm not sure where that reference has come from, Phil, and it's certainly not my words in the point about this bill would limit the further construction of boards or the deconstruction of boards, committees or consultative bodies. Far from it. What the bill is proposing is to ensure that it accurately reflects what has grown up and developed through government over the decades, because, as I said earlier in the interview, the original legislation that covers some of this has now almost defunct in that the boards, consultative bodies and so on that have developed aren't really described accurately enough in the current legislation, and the payment methods and so on and how they attach to various departments. The old legislation does not encapsulate that as accurately as it could. So, as you say, this is a technical bill, and the intention is to modernise all the phraseologies and bring various payment issues together so that what we have is an accurate legal definition of payment methods, boards, relationships to departments moving forward into the future, and with some future proofing as well. So hopefully we don't have to face this situation for some time to come, so if anything else develops, it can be incorporated into this current legislation. The flexibility of the bill is another very important point, and certainly with regulation and secondary legislation powers that the bill will allow for, will give this flexibility going forward.
That was Bill Henderson, MLC. What do you think? Is the Treasury Minister really trying to pinch our pennies? Should we be concerned that the bill makes it easier for departments to increase fees and charges? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gorn. Got a Mayos and Geisteach Rum. Thanks for listening.